They said I kidnapped him, my own son, while he was still holding my hand. The officer tightened the cuffs as my neighbors watched from their lawns, whispering. My son, Elio, was crying behind me, reaching out, and no one stopped it. I'm his mother, I said, but my voice didn't matter, because my mother stepped forward first. She stole him from us, she told the police, pointing straight at me like she'd been waiting for this moment. And they believed her. No hesitation, no questions, just a glance at the papers she handed over, and suddenly I was the criminal. I tried to speak again, but the officer was already pulling me away. Then, before we proceed, a voice cut through everything. The judge, calm, certain. I've already reviewed the original birth record. My mother didn't react, but my father did. And that's when I knew. Something in this room wasn't going the way they planned. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. They said I kidnapped him, my own son, while he was still holding my hand. The officer tightened the cuffs as my neighbors watched from their lawns, whispering. My son, Elio, was crying behind me, reaching out, and no one stopped it. I'm his mother, I said, but my voice didn't matter, because my mother stepped forward first. She stole him from us, she told the police, pointing straight at me like she'd been waiting for this moment. And they believed her. No hesitation, no questions, just a glance at the papers she handed over, and suddenly I was the criminal. I tried to speak again, but the officer was already pulling me away. Then, before we proceed, a voice cut through everything. The judge, calm, certain. I've already reviewed the original birth record. My mother didn't react, but my father did. And that's when I knew. Something in this room wasn't going the way they planned. A week earlier, I had been standing in that same courtroom for the first time, still trying to understand how any of this had escalated so fast. Now I stood at the defense table, hands free but still feeling the phantom pressure of the cuffs. My lawyer leaned slightly toward me, whispering something about procedure, about waiting, about letting the judge speak first, but her voice barely registered. All I could focus on was them. My parents sat across the room like they belonged there, like this was routine. My mother's posture was straight, composed, her hands folded neatly over a folder I recognized instantly, the same one she had handed the police, the one that turned my life upside down in seconds. My father kept his eyes forward this time, avoiding mine completely. They didn't look nervous. They didn't look uncertain. They looked prepared. And that was the part that kept replaying in my head. This wasn't panic. This wasn't confusion. This was planned. The judge opened the file in front of him, flipping to a page already marked. Paper shifted softly in the silence. No one spoke. Not the bailiff, not the attorneys, not even my mother. Then the judge looked up again, his gaze moving from me to them. Measured. Intent. And in that moment, something shifted in the room, subtle but unmistakable. Because whatever was inside that file was about to prove one of us was lying, and it wasn't going to be small. 3 hours before the police showed up, nothing felt like it was about to explode. Elio had just fallen asleep on my shoulder, his breathing slow and warm against my neck. I remember standing in the living room, swaying slightly, waiting for that moment when I could lay him down without waking him. It was quiet, controlled, normal. Then my phone rang. My mother. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. We hadn't spoken in weeks, not since I told her she needed to stop showing up unannounced, stop making decisions for my son like I wasn't in the room. I answered anyway. I'm coming over, she said immediately. No hello, no question. No, I replied, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake Elio. Not today. There was a pause, short but sharp. You don't get to decide that, she said. He's ours too. The line went dead. I stood there for a second, phone still in my hand, Elio shifting slightly against me. My chest tightened, but I told myself the same thing I always did. She's just pushing. She'll calm down. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Soft, rhythmic, controlled. I didn't move. Another knock. Then another. "Elio's sleeping," I called out, not opening the door. "We'll talk later." Silence. I waited, listening for footsteps, for the sound of them leaving. Nothing. Then finally, a car door shutting. I exhaled. Wrong move. 15 minutes later, red and blue lights flooded through my front windows. My stomach dropped before I even reached the door. 2 officers stood outside. My parents were behind them. That's when it stopped feeling like a boundary issue and started feeling like something else. "We received a report of a child abduction," one of the officers said as soon as I opened the door. I actually let out a short laugh, automatic, disbelieving. "From who?" But I already knew. I stepped aside just enough to see them clearly. My mother wasn't angry. She wasn't emotional. She was steady, holding that folder. "They took him from us," she said, her voice calm and precise. "She's not his mother." The officer turned to me, expression neutral but firm. "Ma'am," he said, "do you have proof the child is yours?" Proof. The word didn't make sense at first. Then it hit all at once. The folder in my closet, the documents, gone. I felt the ground shift under me as I looked back at my mother, really looked this time. At how calm she was, at how ready. This wasn't a reaction, this was something she had set up. And as the officer stepped forward, reaching for my arm, one thought cut through everything. What exactly did they do before calling the police? And how far were they willing to take it? By the time the police car door shut behind me, it already felt like the story had been decided, and I wasn't part of writing it. Through the window, I could still see my parents standing on the curb. My mother was talking to one of the officers, her hands moving calmly, deliberately, explaining, clarifying, controlling the narrative. "Elio is my son," I said again, leaning forward as far as the cuffs allowed. The officer in the front seat didn't turn around. "You'll have a chance to explain at the station." A chance. It didn't feel like one. At the station, everything became procedural. Names, dates, questions repeated in slightly different ways. "Relationship to the child?" "Mother." "Proof?" Silence. Because every document they asked for, the birth certificate, the hospital discharge papers, even the pediatric records I kept in one place, were gone. Not lost, gone. And the longer I sat there, the more that realization settled in with a cold, steady weight. They didn't just call the police. They made sure I couldn't defend myself. Hours passed before anyone said anything new. A different officer walked in, holding a single sheet of paper. "Your parents provided this," he said, placing it in front of me. I looked down. It was a birth certificate, Elio's full name printed clearly across the top. My eyes dropped to the line beneath it. Mother. My breath caught. It didn't say Lyra Quen, it said my mother's name. "That's not real," I said immediately, my voice sharper than before. "That's not possible." But even as I said it, doubt crept in, not because I believed it, but because of how convincing it looked. Official seal, registration number, signatures. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't rushed. It was precise. "They're claiming you've been impersonating his parent," the officer said carefully. "That you've been living with the child under false pretenses." Impersonating. The word echoed in my head, louder than anything else. They weren't just trying to take him, they were replacing me. "I gave birth to him," I said, slower now, forcing each word to land. "At Northridge Hospital. You can call them. You can check." "We will," he said. "Until then, we have to follow procedure." Procedure meant I stayed there. Procedure meant Elio didn't come home with me. By the time they released me that night pending court review, temporary custody had already been granted to my parents. Just like that. No warning, no chance to even see him before I left. I walked back into my apartment and the silence hit harder than anything that had happened in that station. His toys were still on the floor, his blanket still on the couch, everything exactly where it should be, except him. I sat down and forced myself to think. Not react, think. The document they showed me had a registration number, a real one. That meant it wasn't just printed, it was filed, somewhere official. And if that was true, then this wasn't just something my parents made up at home. Someone had helped them, someone with access, someone who made it look real enough to take my son away from me, in front of police. I stared at the empty space where his crib stood and felt something shift inside me. Because this wasn't just about proving I was his mother anymore. This was about proving how far they'd gone to erase me, and who made it possible. By the time I walked back into that courtroom, it wasn't just about getting Elio back. It was about stopping whatever this had become. My parents were already seated when I arrived. Same posture, same calm control. My mother's hands rested over that folder again, like it was the only thing anchoring her confidence. My lawyer leaned in close. "We've requested the hospital's original records directly," she whispered. "If anything was altered, this is where it breaks." If. That word lingered as I took my seat, because everything so far had gone their way. The judge called the case, and my mother stood first. "She's been unstable since the pregnancy," she said, her tone measured, almost sympathetic. "We stepped in because the child wasn't safe." Not emotional, not defensive, just convincing. My father nodded beside her, reinforcing every word without saying anything. When it was my turn, I didn't rush. "Elio is my son," I said, steady this time, "and they've been trying to take control of him for months." I saw it then, a flicker in my mother's expression. Small, controlled, but real. The judge didn't react outwardly. He simply looked between us, then asked, "When exactly was the birth registered?" My mother answered immediately. "The same day, at the hospital." Too smooth, too fast. My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, according to the hospital intake logs we obtained, the child was delivered at 2:14 a.m. However, registration did not occur until later that afternoon." A pause, subtle but enough to shift something in the room. The judge's pen stopped moving. My mother adjusted slightly in her seat. "That's normal," she said. "There can be delays." "Of course," my lawyer replied calmly, "which is why we requested the original archived record directly from the hospital system." That word, original, hung in the air, heavier than anything else so far. The judge nodded once, then reached for the file in front of him. "The court has already received that document," he said. My chest tightened. This was it. He placed the file flat on the desk and opened it slowly, like there was no need to rush something that was already decided. "This record," he continued, "was not provided by either party." Now my father moved, just slightly. He turned his head toward my mother for the first time since this began. Not confident, not certain, concerned. Paper shifted as the judge turned to the marked page. No one spoke. No one moved. Even the air felt still. He adjusted his glasses, eyes scanning the document. Then he looked up, first at me, then at my parents, and said clearly, "There appears to be a discrepancy." My heart slammed against my ribs, because everything was about to hinge on what he said next. And for the first time since they pointed at me and called me a criminal, my parents didn't look in control anymore. So what was written in that original record that they couldn't explain? The judge didn't rush his words. He looked back down at the document, reading it fully this time, line by line, like he was making sure there was no room for interpretation. Then he spoke. "The original birth record lists the mother as Lyra Quen." My name. Clear. Undeniable. For a second, nothing happened. No reaction, no noise, just silence. Then it shifted, not loudly, but completely. My mother's composure didn't shatter, it slipped. Subtle, but visible. Her lips pressed tighter, her shoulders stiffening as she leaned forward. "That's incorrect," she said quickly. "There must be a clerical—" "There isn't," the judge cut in, calm but final. He lifted the document slightly. "This record was retrieved directly from Northridge Hospital's archive system this morning. It includes timestamp verification, attending physician signatures, and biometric confirmation tied to the mother." Biometric. I felt it instantly, that memory, the fingerprint scan, the ID bracelet, the verification I barely thought about after giving birth. Things you couldn't fake. My lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the document submitted by the opposing party appears to be falsified. We formally request an investigation into its origin and submission." Now the room turned. Not toward me, toward them. My father finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. "This is a misunderstanding." But it didn't land. Not now, not after that. The judge didn't entertain it. "Temporary custody is immediately restored to Lyra Quen," he said, his tone steady. "Additionally, this court is referring the submitted documentation and initial police report for formal investigation." That was it. Not dramatic, not explosive, just decided. I saw Elio later that day. He didn't understand courtrooms or documents or accusations. He just saw me and ran. His arms wrapped around my legs like nothing had happened, like the last week didn't exist. I picked him up, holding him tighter than I ever had, feeling something finally release in my chest. Not relief, not completely, but something close enough. The investigation moved faster than I expected. The birth certificate my parents submitted wasn't just altered. It had been professionally fabricated using real registration data pulled from the hospital system. Which meant what I suspected was true. They hadn't done this alone. A records clerk at Northridge, someone my parents had contacted weeks before the arrest, had accessed partial files and sold them copies of legitimate registration numbers. They built the lie on top of something real, just not real enough. The charges followed: forgery, fraud, filing a false police report, attempted custodial interference. Words that carried weight, real consequences. Outside the courtroom, everything shifted even more. Neighbors who watched me get arrested avoided eye contact now. Family members who stayed quiet before started calling, with questions, with distance, with hesitation. The version of the story my parents told didn't hold up anymore, because the truth had documentation behind it. I changed everything after that. New locks, new document storage, legal protections, no more access, no more chances. The last time I saw my parents in court, they didn't look at me. Not once. No confidence, no control, just silence. And for the first time since that day on my front lawn, when they pointed at me and said I stole my own son, there were no questions left. Because the truth wasn't something I had to argue anymore. It was already written, already verified, already seen. And this time, everyone believed it.